I'd like to move now to the presentation from CNSC staff as outlined in CMD 18H4.B and 18H4.C. Mr. Frappier, I understand you're going to make the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. President and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Jerry Frappier, and I'm the Director General of the Directorate of Power Reactor Regulation at the CNSC. With me today are Mr. Luc Sigouin, Director of the Bruce Regulatory Program Division, and Mr. Ken Lund, Senior Regulatory Program Officer of the same division. Regulatory and technical staff from the CNSC are also present and available to answer any questions the Commission may have. I'll now pass the presentation to Mr. Luc Sigouin.
Thank you, Mr. Frappier. For the record, my name is Luc Sigouin. I'm the Director of the Bruce Regulatory Program at the CNSC. This presentation provides information in relation to the renewal of the Bruce A and B Power Reactor Operating License. Our presentation today will provide a summary of the Part 1 information relating to staff assessment of Bruce Power's performance, as well as updates and responses to Commission requests from the Part 1 hearing. I will now provide some background for the presentation. Part 1 of the Bruce license renewal hearing occurred in Ottawa on March 14, 2018. During that time, CNSC staff presented a summary as well as highlights from CNSC staff's written submission found in CMD 18H4. The CMD provided CNSC staff's conclusions and recommendations on license renewal. Today's presentation provides updated information since the Part 1 hearing and highlights the detailed information found in CNSC staff's supplemental CMD 18H4B. Of note, all information pertaining to the March 14th Part 1 hearing is available on the CNSC website. This includes all CMDs, as well as a transcript and video recordings of the proceedings. I will now go over the purpose of this hearing. The Commission granted Bruce Power its first license to operate the Bruce A and B stations in 2001. The most recent relicensing hearing was conducted in 2015. This hearing represents the 6th license renewal request to the Commission. In June 2017, Bruce Power submitted a request to the Commission to renew its power reactor operating license for a period of 10 years, which encompasses operation as well as activities related to refurbishment. In support of the license application and activities associated with refurbishment, Bruce Power completed a periodic safety review, or a PSR, in accordance with CNSC Regulatory Document 233 on periodic safety review. In its application, Bruce Power is requesting that the Commission approve the operation of Bruce A and B up to a maximum of 300,000 equivalent full power hours, or EFPH. The current license allows for operation up to 247,000 equivalent full power hours. Bruce Power is also requesting the Commission to accept the scope of the refurbishment project as identified in the Integrated Implementation Plan. And lastly, Bruce Power is requesting the consolidation of the Class 2 nuclear facilities and nuclear substance and radiation devices licenses into the power reactor operating license. These include the irradiator facility license used for instrument calibration, the consolidated use of nuclear substance licenses for laboratories and radiation devices, and the industrial radiography license for non-destructive testing. A periodic safety review is a comprehensive evaluation of the design, condition, and operation of a nuclear power plant. International practice for PSR intervals is that they be performed every 10 years. A PSR involves an assessment of the current state of the plant, as well as plant performance, to determine the extent to which the nuclear power plant conforms to modern standards and best practices, and to identify any factors that would limit safe long-term operation. This enables the determination of reasonable and practical modifications that should be made to allow for safe long-term operation and to enhance the safety of the facility to a level approaching that of a new NPP. In undertaking the PSR, Bruce Power has systematically reviewed the current state of the plant against modern standards and practices, and has identified the improvements that will be made to Bruce A and B over the next 10 years. CNSC staff reviewed the submitted information and determined that Bruce Power's PSR met the requirements of Reg Doc 233 on periodic safety review, and that all commitments are documented in an integrated improvement plan. CNSC staff will report annually on the status of all PSR commitments to the Commission through the annual Regulatory Oversight Report on Canadian Nuclear Power Generating Sites, which was formerly called the Regulatory Oversight Report on Canadian Nuclear Power Plants. This slide provides Bruce Power's timeframe for refurbishment of the Bruce units. Refurbishment would start with Bruce B Unit 6 in 2020 and would continue until 2033 with Unit 8. The requested license period would expire in 2028. Pending the licensing decision by the Commission, Bruce Power would need to submit a new license application, including a new periodic safety review, prior to the start of refurbishments of Units 7 and 8. CNSC staff did not identify factors which would limit safe operation over the next licensing period. Bruce Power has programs and processes in place to safely manage refurbishment work, and CNSC staff will maintain oversight of the programs by conducting detailed refurbishment reviews and inspections. These reviews and inspections will focus on topics such as project execution, contractor and project management, and training programs. Regulatory hold points will ensure operational readiness of structures, systems, and components for the return to full power operation. The hold points would serve as regulatory verification to ensure that all prerequisites have been met to allow for staged increases in reactor power. Given that the refurbishment work will span several years, CNSC staff will provide updates to the Commission on the status of the project through the annual Regulatory Oversight Report on nuclear generating sites, as well as through the regular status updates on power reactors. Following refurbishment of a unit, licensees are required to perform commissioning tests to demonstrate that the reactor facility can operate in the modes for which it has been designed. Bruce Power is required to demonstrate that the associated work meets specified requirements and to ensure that documentation has been updated appropriately. Similar to other refurbishment projects, CNSC staff identified 4 regulatory hold points for the return to service of each unit undergoing refurbishment work. These hold points include prior to fuel load, prior to removal of guaranteed shutdown state, prior to exceeding 1% full power, and prior to exceeding 35% full power. CNSC staff are recommending that the approval to remove regulatory hold points be delegated to the Executive Vice President and Chief Regulatory Operations Officer of the CNSC. For reference, a similar delegation of authority was previously granted for the refurbishment of Darlington, the refurbishment of Point Lepreau, and also for the refurbishment of Bruce Power Units 1 and 2. I will now provide an overview of CNSC staff's performance assessment of Bruce Power in the 14 safety and control areas, starting with an overview on CNSC staff compliance verification activities. Bruce Power is responsible for ensuring safe operation of the stations, and CNSC staff independently verify Bruce Power's performance. CNSC site inspectors carry out daily walkdowns as well as inspections with specialist staff from Ottawa, following the CNSC Risk-Informed Baseline Compliance Program. The regulatory efforts can be adjusted depending on the performance of the licensee, as well as the need to oversee special projects such as refurbishment. This table shows the compliance verification activities by CNSC staff during the current licensing period. This includes reviews of Reg Doc 311 event reports, plant walkdowns, and detailed inspections. These activities represent an average of 1,600 person days of effort per year at the Bruce site and over 5,000 total person days of effort per year spent on all Bruce regulatory compliance activities. The reported numbers in 2015 were lower at site compared to other years, as CNSC site staff efforts were shifted towards activities required to support the 2015 license renewal. CNSC staff have not identified any significant findings as a result of the compliance activities that were performed at Bruce A and B. This slide provides the summary of Bruce A and B plant ratings over the current license period for each of the 14 safety and control areas. CNSC staff continues to report on the performance of Bruce A and B separately, even after the licenses were combined into a single license in 2015. Although many of the programs, processes, and procedures are shared between Bruce A and B, each station has its own separate work crews, and the stations differ in design, as Bruce B was built 7 years after Bruce A. Bruce Power's performance in 2017 was rated either satisfactory or fully satisfactory in all 14 safety and control areas. Their ratings are unchanged from 2016. This slide provides a summary of Bruce Power's performance over the current licensing period. Bruce Power meets regulatory requirements in all SCAs and received a satisfactory rating or higher in each of the SCAs. No worker or members of the public received radiation doses in excess of the regulatory dose limits. All radiological releases were well below regulatory limits, and all releases of nuclear and hazardous substances were assessed, controlled, and monitored. Licensee programs are implemented and maintained effectively and in accordance with regulatory requirements. And safety enhancements and improvements continued to be made during the current license period. I will now pass the presentation to Mr. Lunn, who will provide focused highlights on the regulatory focus areas.
Thank you, Mr. Sigwine, Mr. President, and members of the Commission. My name is Ken Lunn. I'm the Senior Regulatory Program Officer of the Bruce Regulatory Program Division. As previously mentioned, the regulatory focus area include the 14 safety and control areas and other matters of regulatory interest. In assessing the license application, all of the safety and control areas were assessed in detail. CMD 18H4 presented CNC staff's assessment for each of the areas. The rest of today's presentation will focus on updates in the areas of managing alcohol and drug use, large release frequency results, environmental protection, the 2017 Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan, waste management, Fisheries Act Authorization, and fracture toughness for pressure tubes. In the earlier presentation, Bruce Power provided its implementation strategy for RegDoc 2.2.4, Volume 2, on managing alcohol and drug use. CNSC staff are currently reviewing the implementation plan and will continue to assess Bruce Power's implementation. Bruce Power will provide an update on the implementation plan in fall 2018. The implementation dates may be impacted by legal challenges in respect to random alcohol and drug testing. During the Part 1 hearing, the Commission requested CNSC staff to provide graphs showing large release frequency, or LRF, results for the 2014 Probabilistic Safety Assessment, or PSA, and the estimated data with planned improvements. These are provided on this slide and also in Bruce Power's earlier presentation. As stated in CNSC staff's written CMD, the PSA results submitted in 2014 meet all regulatory requirements. PSA results are updated on a 5-year frequency. The next PSA update will will be submitted in 2019. In April 2018, Bruce Power implemented a policy to assess PSA results that fall between the safety goal limit and the safety goal target to determine if further enhancements could be made. CNSC staff reviewed Bruce Power's policy and concluded that it meets CNSC's expectations. CNSC staff determined that Bruce Power has an effective environmental protection program. To ensure the protection of the environment and health of persons, the CNSC conducts an environmental assessment under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, or NSCA, for all projects within its mandate. CNSC staff completed an environmental assessment, or EA report, which was included in CMD 18H4. The core scientific basis used in the NSCA EA is equivalent to those of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012 EAs. The EA under the NSCA concluded that the risk to the environment is low to negligible, and that Bruce Power has and will continue to make adequate provision for the protection of the environment and health of persons. The Saugeen Ojibwe Nation expressed concerns related to potential environmental impacts of Bruce A and B, most notably related to impacts on fish. CNSC staff determined there is sufficient evidence and information on hand to conclude that the environment is adequately protected now and that it will be protected into the future. CNSC staff agreed there are some areas of uncertainty, but CNSC staff conclude there is sufficient margin to prevent unreasonable risk to the environment. CNSC staff agreed that additional monitoring and assessments can be implemented to increase accuracy. These areas include impacts to fish from impingement and entrainment, effluent and environmental monitoring programs, and thermal risk assessment. Details of these discussions are provided in staff's supplemental written CMD. The CNSC Independent Environmental Monitoring Program was implemented to verify the public health and the environment are not adversely affected by releases around CNSC regulated facilities. This verification is achieved through independent sampling and analysis by CNSC staff. The previous sampling campaign related to Bruce Power was carried out in 2016, with the next campaign scheduled for 2019. Detailed results of CNSC analysis are consistent with results submitted by Bruce Power and are available on the CNSC's public website. The Emergency Management and Fire Protection SCA covers emergency plans and emergency preparedness programs. Bruce Power has the capability to respond effectively to any emergency. Bruce Power's emergency response plan covers both nuclear emergencies and conventional emergencies such as fire. In April 2018, the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management provided an update to the Commission on emergency management in Ontario and the 2017 Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan, or PNERP. Bruce Power is currently meeting all the requirements from the 2017 PNERP. No significant changes are expected to Bruce Power's emergency plan. Impact to the municipal plans is expected to be incremental. The existing plans remain in effect and are adequate to protect the local residents. The Waste Management SCA covers internal waste-related programs as well as planning for decommissioning. CNSC staff determined that Bruce Power has submitted sufficient information in its application to address the requirements of the General Nuclear Safety and Control Regulations. The required information is contained by reference in documents such as the Preliminary Decommissioning Plan, Annual Compliance Reports, and Waste Management Program documents. On and off-site transfer of all radioactive waste from the Bruce site are managed per regulatory requirements. CNSC's regulatory approach does not license individual shipments, nor the import and export of waste. Most of the waste processing and handling at Bruce site are performed by Ontario Power Generation, or OPG, who's licensed by the CNSC. Finally, the waste resulting from the refurbishment activities has been considered in environmental assessments. There are plans in place for the management of this waste. Specifically, Bruce Power ensures that reduce, reuse, and recycle principle is met by transferring waste off-site for processing to further reduce the waste volume. The Western Waste Management Facility has sufficient capacity for interim storage of low and intermediate level waste arising from refurbishment and from ongoing operation, including used nuclear fuel. The design of the proposed OPG Deep Geological Repository includes the consideration of waste volumes from the refurbishment of the Bruce units. In 2015, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, or DFO, determined there's a need for an authorization under the Fisheries Act due to the impingement and entrainment of fish. The process for obtaining a Fisheries Act authorization is separate from that of CNC license renewal, as they are covered by different legislation. Under the Memorandum of Understanding between the CNSC and DFO, the CNSC will be responsible for the assessment and monitoring of environmental impact on fish, while DFO will be responsible for issuing Fisheries Act authorization and the required offset measures. In May 2018, Bruce Power submitted their proposed application to CNSC staff for review prior to the official submission to DFO. CNSC staff review of the application is currently in progress. Once the review is completed by CNSC staff, the next steps will involve engagement with Indigenous groups on the specifics of the application, and then formal submission of the application to DFO by Bruce Power. CNSC staff expect that the application will be ready to be submitted to DFO in the latter part of 2018. I will now pass the presentation back to Mrs. Seguin, who will go over the topics of fracture toughness for pressure tubes and Aboriginal consultation and engagement.
Thank you. Luc Seguin again for the record. As discussed during the Part 1 hearing, fracture toughness is a key parameter for pressure tubes. Currently, Bruce Power and the Canadian nuclear industry have developed two fracture toughness models for hydrogen equivalent concentration levels, or HEQ, up to 120 parts per million, or ppm. These models are used in Bruce Power's assessments to demonstrate the safe operation of pressure tubes in the unlikely event that a crack initiates and propagates through the wall of a pressure tube. Bruce Power has indicated that HEQ is deterministically estimated to reach about 150 ppm prior to refurbishment, which is beyond the limits of the current model. Bruce Power has a plan in place to continue the development of the fracture toughness models for HEQ up to 160 ppm. Bruce Power is performing ongoing monitoring of hydrogen content of pressure tubes, as well as research and development work, such as pressure tube burst tests. Bruce Power must demonstrate to the CNSC that there is sufficient safety margin for the fracture toughness model for HEQ up to 160 ppm. This table was presented during the Part 1 hearing. It indicates the year, the equivalent full power hours, and the estimated HEQ content for each unit in relation to its planned refurbishment date. For the Part 2 hearing, two columns have been added to the right side of the table. These columns show the current HEQ level at the inlet and outlet ends of the pressure tubes. It is CNSC staff's view that the existing regulatory process, which was used to assess and accept the 120 ppm model, is adequate for the continued oversight of fitness for service evaluations of pressure tubes, including the determination of the acceptability of the model for HEQ up to 160 ppm. In effect, CNSC staff are proposing two requirements on Bruce Power. First, that Bruce A and B shall not operate beyond 300,000 EFPH. And second, that Bruce A and B shall not operate beyond HEQ levels of 120 ppm until Bruce Power has demonstrated that pressure tube fracture toughness is sufficient for safe operation. In January 2018, CNSC staff presented CMD 18M4 on fuel channel evaluations for Canadian nuclear power plants. The presentation described the key requirements for assessing the fitness for service, as well as the rigorous regulatory process that CNSC staff applies to ensure that fitness for service requirements have been met. The requirements and the regulatory oversight process for fitness for service of fuel channels is applied consistently across all licensees. In addition to the information provided in CMD 18M4 on fuel channels, I'd like to touch on the issue of HEQ levels at the inlet and outlet of pressure tubes. The HEQ limits of 70 ppm for the inlet and 100 ppm for the outlet end of pressure tubes, as defined in CSA standards, are not hard limits. The CSA standards allow for operation beyond those levels, provided that additional fitness for service evaluations have been performed. Bruce Power and the Canadian nuclear industry continue to evaluate the impact of HEQ on pressure tube integrity, including at inlet and outlet regions. And CNSC staff will continue to perform reviews of these findings to ensure that pressure tubes remain fit for service. As requested by the Commission during the Part 1 hearing, CNSC staff have strengthened the license condition 15.3. The details are provided in staff CMD 18H4B. Clear and comprehensive compliance verification criteria have been developed to monitor the progress of the work, including a requirement for Bruce Power to provide formal semi-annual updates to CNSC staff on the work progress. In addition, CNSC staff will report to the Commission on the status of this work through the annual Regulatory Oversight Report for Canadian nuclear power generating sites. Irrespective of the EFPH value, Bruce Power must continue to demonstrate to the CNSC that fuel channels are fit for service for the continued safe operation of the units. CNSC staff recommend that the Commission approve operation of Bruce A and B up to a maximum of 300,000 EFPH, and also place a license condition on Bruce Power to develop a fracture toughness model for HEQ in excess of 120 ppm. This recommendation is based on the following: that Bruce Power will continue to operate its units within the licensing basis and maintain sufficient safety margin at all times, that the degradation mechanisms of pressure tubes are well understood by industry and CNSC, that Bruce Power has a comprehensive inspection and monitoring program in place specifically to monitor HEQ levels, and that a robust regulatory oversight process is in place to ensure that Bruce Power will meet its commitments. As an agent of the Crown, the CNSC understands the importance of building relationships and consulting with Aboriginal peoples in Canada. The CNSC ensures that all its licensing decisions under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act uphold the honor of the Crown and consider potential or established Aboriginal and treaty rights. The Bruce site lies within the traditional territories of the Métis Nation of Ontario, the historic Saugeen Métis, and the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation and the Saugeen First Nation, who together form Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. In September 2017, CNSC staff sent letters of notification to SON, MNO, and HSM, in addition to the Union of Ontario Indians and the Chiefs of Ontario. CNSC staff met with SON, the MNO, and the HSM to discuss the application, the process for getting involved, and to better understand their concerns related to the Bruce site. Follow-up information, including the license renewal CMD and the EA report, was sent to all groups in February 2018. Bruce Power has a formal relationship with each of SON, the MNO, and the HSM through established protocol agreements. These agreements provide the framework for the continued collaboration between Bruce Power and each group. CNSC staff and Bruce Power have continually engaged with SON, the MNO, and the HSM, both individually and jointly, and will continue to do so throughout the life cycle of the facilities. All of the identified Indigenous groups have been encouraged to participate in the review process and in the public hearing to advise the Commission directly of any concerns they may have in relation to this license application. CMD 18H4B provides additional information related to SON concerns. The CNSC continues to meet with Indigenous groups to encourage and maintain productive and respectful relationships. CNSC has engaged extensively with SON on impacts the Bruce facility is having on the environment. As part of our ongoing collaboration, a meeting was held in March 2018 where CNSC staff met with SON to develop specific areas of collaboration to address their concerns, including those related to the 2018 licensing hearing. While there remain differences of opinion between CNSC staff and SON on the impacts the Bruce facility is having on the environment, we have identified constructive activities and both parties are committed to working together. CMD 18H4B provides the details on collaboration with SON to address its concerns. These include specifically the development of a study and analysis program to reduce uncertainties on potential environmental impacts, the participation of SON in environmental monitoring activities, and the study of available mitigation measures. Additional collaboration such as outreach, sharing of CNSC inspection results, and coordinating meetings with Crown agencies involved in oversight on nuclear matters in SON territory have also been identified. CNSC staff will work with all Indigenous groups on their concerns. Bruce Power has requested a 10-year license period. CNSC staff have assessed the request and have considered the following. First, Bruce Power has demonstrated continued safety, satisfactory performance, and a commitment to continue to improve performance in all safety and control areas, as well as implement the PSR commitments. Second, there is ongoing surveillance and comprehensive inspection activities performed by CNSC staff at the Bruce site. Third, annual reporting in the Regulatory Oversight Report for Nuclear Generating Sites to the Commission provides the public with frequent updates regarding the CNSC regulatory oversight activities and Bruce Power's operation. And this also allows the public to participate in the proceedings to present their views on the performance of the licensee. And finally, the use of a 10-year license period for nuclear power plants is aligned with international practice and benchmarks. Based on these facts, CNSC staff are recommending a 10-year license period. Based on the assessments of Bruce Power's safety performance, CNSC staff conclude that as per Section 24(4) of the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, Bruce Power is qualified to carry out the activities authorized by the license, and in carrying out the licensed activities, Bruce Power has made and will continue to make adequate provision for the protection of the environment, the health and safety of persons, and the maintenance of national security and measures required to implement international obligations to which Canada has agreed. CNSC staff recommend that the Commission accept the conclusions and recommendations presented in CMD 18H4 and exercise its authority under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act to renew the license and to authorize Bruce Power to continue to operate Bruce A and B nuclear generating stations for a period of 10 years. CNSC staff also recommend that the Commission consolidate the licenses for industrial radiography, the Class II irradiator facility, and the consolidated use of nuclear substances into the power reactor operating license. Finally, CNSC staff recommend the Commission to authorize Bruce Power to operate Bruce A and B up to a maximum of 300,000 equivalent full power hours. Furthermore, CNSC staff recommend that the Commission place the following conditions as part of the license renewal: to implement the integrated implementation plan resulting from the periodic safety review that supports this license renewal application, to demonstrate that pressure tube fracture toughness will be sufficient for safe operation beyond 120 ppm, to implement a return to service plan for refurbishment activities, to obtain authorization from the Commission or a delegate to remove regulatory hold points during the return to service, to conduct another periodic safety review as part of the next license renewal, and finally, to direct CNSC staff and Bruce Power to work with Indigenous groups to address their areas of concern. CNSC staff also recommend that the Commission authorize the delegation of authority as indicated in two proposed license conditions on this slide. The first is license condition 3.2 for restart after a serious process failure, and the second is license condition 15.5 for the removal of regulatory hold points related to return to service. The Commission may delegate authority to CNSC staff with respect to the administration of license conditions or portions thereof. CNSC staff recommend that the authority be delegated to the Executive Vice President of the Regulatory Operations Branch. This is the same as what has been delegated for other power reactor operating licenses. This concludes our presentation. Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Commission. We are prepared to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you.